You think a note can pay for that scratch? Mafia boss trapped her against his car in the dark alley. The rain in Northport City did not wash things clean. It simply made the grime slicker. It was a heavy, industrial downpour that smelled of wet asphalt and cold iron, battering the roof of the 24-hour diner where Lena Hart had just finished a double shift. The neon sign buzzing above the entrance flickered with a dying amber light, reflecting in the puddles that had gathered on the uneven sidewalk. Lena untied her apron, her fingers stiff and aching. Her lower back throbbed with a dull, persistent rhythm, a reminder of the 14 hours she had spent on her feet carrying trays of greasy burgers and refilling endless cups of weak coffee. She shoved the apron into her locker and pulled on her coat. It was a thin, wool blend that had seen better days, much like everything else in her life. She checked her reflection in the cracked employee mirror. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes, and her brown hair was escaping the messy bun she had tied hours ago. She looked exhausted, but beneath the fatigue, there was a sharpness to her jawline, a quiet determination that kept her moving when her body wanted to collapse. She had to keep moving. There was no other option. Pushing out the back door into the alley, Lena gasped as the cold wind hit her damp skin. Her old Honda Civic was parked haphazardly near the dumpster, a relic of the late 90s with a rusting frame and an engine that sounded like a bag of hammers. She prayed it would start. She needed to get home to Jake. Her younger brother had been worse this morning, his breathing shallow and rattling in his chest. The thought of him alone in their drafty apartment made her chest tighten with anxiety. She climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life with a reluctant shudder. Lena exhaled, resting her forehead against the steering wheel for a brief second of gratitude. She threw the gear stick into reverse, checking her mirrors. The rain obscured the rear window, turning the world behind her into a blur of gray and black shapes. She squinted, easing her foot off the clutch. She thought she had clearance. The alley was usually empty this late, save for the delivery trucks that came in the early morning. She accelerated slightly, just enough to swing the nose of the car around. Then came the sound. It was a sickening, high-pitched screech of metal tearing against metal, a noise that vibrated through the floorboards of her Civic and straight into her bones. Lena slammed on the brakes, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. No, please, no. She scrambled out of the car, ignoring the water soaking her sneakers. Behind her, parked in the shadows where she had not seen it, was a car that looked less like a vehicle and more like a weapon. It was a sleek, black sedan, low to the ground, with tinted windows and rims that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. Even in the dim light of the alley, it radiated power and money, and there, marring the pristine paint of the rear door, was a long, jagged white scratch. Lena stared at it, her hands flying to her mouth. The scratch was deep. She had peeled away the layers of expensive black coating down to the primer. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She looked around wildly. The alley was empty, but the back door of the upscale private club adjacent to the diner was only 20 feet away. This car belonged to someone inside, someone rich, someone who would not take kindly to a waitress destroying their property. She checked her pockets. She had $40 in tips and $12 in her bank account. She could not pay for this. She could not even pay to look at a car like this. Fleeing was the first instinct. It would be so easy. Just get back in the Honda and drive away. No one was watching. The rain would wash away the tire tracks. But then she thought of her father. Before the accident, before everything fell apart, he had taught her that integrity was the only thing a poor man owned that a rich man could not buy. If she ran now, she would lose the only thing she had left. Her hands trembling. Lena reached into her bag and pulled out her order pad and a pen. The paper was damp from the humidity, threatening to tear under the pressure of the ballpoint. "I am so sorry," she wrote, her handwriting jagged with adrenaline. "I didn't see your car. I can't pay for the damage right now, but I will make it right. Please contact me." She hesitated, then scrawled her name and phone number at the bottom. It felt like signing a death warrant. She tore the page out and tucked it under the windshield wiper of the luxury car, praying the rain wouldn't dissolve the ink before the owner found it. Her own car had stalled again in her haste, and when she tried the key, it gave a pathetic click and died completely. Tears burned the corners of her eyes. Of course, she couldn't wait here. If the owner came out now, while she was stranded and helpless, the confrontation would be too much. She grabbed her purse, locked the Honda, and ran toward the main street to catch the last bus. She would deal with the car tomorrow. Tonight. She just had to survive. Dominic Viero stepped out of the rear exit of the Velvet Room, his collar turned up against the biting wind. He was a man who commanded silence without speaking, tall, with shoulders that filled out his tailored wool coat. He moved with a predatory grace that made people instinctively step out of his path. Two of his men, massive figures in dark suits, flanked him. One of them, a thick-necked enforcer named Marco, moved ahead to open the door of the black sedan waiting in the alley. Marco stopped dead. "Boss," he muttered, his voice rough. "You gotta see this." Dominic approached slowly. His eyes, dark and calculating, swept over the vehicle. He saw the scratch immediately. It was an ugly wound on the flawless surface of the car. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. Disrespect was a currency in his world, and someone had just spent a lot of it. "Who was it?" Dominic asked, his voice low and dangerously calm. "Don't know," Marco said, peering at the windshield, "but they left a souvenir." He pulled the soggy piece of paper from under the wiper and handed it to Dominic. Marco let out a short, barking laugh. "Look at that. They left a note. Probably some drunk kid thinking an apology fixes a $10,000 paint job." Dominic took the paper. The ink was bleeding slightly, but the handwriting was legible. It was a delicate, looping script, frantic but clear. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see your car. I will make it right." Dominic read the words twice. In Northport, nobody apologized. If someone hit your car, they ran, or they shot you before you could ask for insurance. To leave a name, to leave a number, it was an act of stupidity, or an act of terrifying innocence. "Lena Hart," Dominic read aloud. The name tasted soft on his tongue, a stark contrast to the metallic taste of violence that usually filled his days. "Want us to find who did it and teach them a lesson?" Marco asked, cracking his knuckles. "We can track the number." Dominic looked at the scratch again, then back at the note. He folded the damp paper carefully and placed it into the inner pocket of his coat, right over his heart. "No," Dominic said, a ghost of a smirk touching his lips. "Find her. But don't touch her. I want to see who has the nerve to leave a note for Dominic Viero." He was not angry. He was fascinated, and in Dominic's world, his fascination was far more dangerous than his rage. 2 nights later, the rain had cleared, leaving behind a damp, bone-chilling fog that clung to the brick buildings of the lower district. Lena walked quickly, her sneakers making no sound on the wet pavement. She had taken a different route home, avoiding the alley behind the diner. Terrified that the black car would be there again, she hadn't received a call. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart leaped into her throat, but it was usually just the automated reminder from the electric company or a spam caller. She had started to hope, foolishly, that maybe the owner was so rich he hadn't even noticed the scratch. Maybe he had seen the note and thrown it away, deciding it wasn't worth the hassle of chasing down a waitress. She turned the corner onto the narrow street that led to her apartment building. The streetlights here were broken, shattered by kids throwing rocks or burnt out from neglect. Shadows stretched long and deep between the buildings. Lena hugged her coat tighter around herself. She sensed the shift in the air before she saw anything. The silence felt heavy, manufactured. She quickened her pace. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the mouth of an alleyway ahead, blocking her path. Lena gasped and spun around to retreat, but she backed straight into the cold, hard surface of a car that hadn't been there a moment ago. She whipped her head around. It was a black sedan. Panic flared in her chest. She was trapped. The man in front of her stepped into the dim light of a distant street lamp. It was him. She knew it instantly. He was terrifyingly handsome, with sharp features carved from marble and eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them. He wore a long, tailored coat that cost more than her life's earnings. And he looked at her, not with anger, but with a crushing intensity. "Going somewhere, Lena?" His voice was a deep baritone that vibrated through the soles of her feet. He knew her name. Lena's voice failed her. She pressed her back against his car, trying to put distance between them. But he closed the gap in 2 long strides. He stopped inches from her. He was tall, looming over her, blocking out the world. She could smell him. Expensive leather, rain, and a hint of sandalwood. It was an intoxicating, dangerous scent. He placed one hand on the roof of the car and the other on the door frame, effectively caging her in. His body heat radiated toward her, overwhelming in the cold night air. "You think a note can pay for that scratch?" he growled, his voice dropping an octave. He tilted his head, his dark eyes boring into hers. Lena trembled. She couldn't help it. The man radiated a lethal kind of power, the kind that commanded armies and silenced rooms. But she remembered Jake. She remembered that she was the only thing standing between her brother and the abyss. She could not crumble now. She lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I told you I would make it right," she whispered, her voice shaking but clear. "I don't have the money now, but I work hard. I pay my debts." Dominic watched her. He saw the fear in her eyes, the way her pulse fluttered visibly in her throat. Most people begged him for mercy before he even spoke. Most people cried. She was terrified. Yes, but she was standing tall. She had a quiet dignity that struck him like a physical blow. It was rare. It was precious. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" he asked softly. "I know you own this car," Lena said, "and I know I damaged it." Dominic's lips twitched. "That scratch is going to cost $5,000 to fix." "Do you have $5,000? Lena?" She swallowed hard. "No. Then how do you propose to pay me?" He leaned closer. His face was so near she could feel his breath on her cheek. "Money isn't the only currency." Lena's heart hammered. She knew what men like him usually wanted. She braced herself, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "I won't do that. I'm not that kind of girl." Dominic laughed, a low, dark sound that rumbled in his chest. He pulled back slightly, giving her a fraction of breathing room. "I didn't ask you to be. I don't want your body. Lena, not like that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black business card. He held it up between 2 fingers. "You said you work hard," he said. "Prove it. You want to work off your debt? You call this number." He tucked the card into the pocket of her coat. His knuckles brushed the fabric, and the contact sent a jolt of electricity through her. "Don't make me come find you again," he warned. "Because next time, I won't be asking." He stepped back, the cage dissolving. He turned and opened the driver's side door of the sedan. The engine purred to life, a menacing growl in the quiet street. Lena stood frozen against the brick wall as the car pulled away, disappearing into the fog. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the card. It was heavy, matte black, with nothing but a gold-embossed phone number in the center. No name, no business. The apartment was cold when Lena got home. She locked the door with trembling fingers and leaned her forehead against the wood, waiting for her heart rate to return to normal. "Lena?" A weak voice called from the living room. She pushed herself off the door and walked into the main room. Her brother, Jake, was curled up on the sagging couch, wrapped in 3 blankets. He was 18, but the chronic illness that had plagued him since childhood made him look much younger. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and dark hollows circled his eyes. "Hey," Lena said, forcing a brightness into her voice she didn't feel. "I'm home. Did you eat?" Jake nodded, suppressing a cough. "Had some soup. You look like you saw a ghost." "Just tired," she lied. She walked over and felt his forehead. He was burning up again. Jake leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. "They called about the prescription today," he murmured. "Said insurance won't cover the new inhaler. It's $400. Lena." Lena's stomach dropped. $400. She didn't have 40. The pile of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter seemed to grow taller every time she looked at it. Rent was due in 3 days. The electricity was past due. And now, the car debt. She looked at Jake, listening to the wheeze in his chest. He was the only family she had left. She had dropped out of college to take care of him after their parents died in the crash. She had given up everything for him. She couldn't fail him now. She went into the small kitchen and pulled the black card from her pocket. It sat on the laminate countertop like a heavy stone. "Don't make me come find you again." The man was dangerous. She knew that in her bones. But he offered a way out, or at least a way to keep breathing. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone. It was late, almost 2 in the morning. Surely he wouldn't answer. She typed the number into a text message. "It's Lena, the girl from the alley." She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. The reply came 10 seconds later. 10 p.m. tomorrow, the Onyx Lounge, VIP entrance. Dress well. No explanation, no negotiation, just a command. The Onyx Lounge was a fortress of glass and steel located in the heart of the financial district. It was the kind of place where politicians and celebrities mingled with people who didn't exist on any official census. Lena stood outside the velvet ropes the next night. She wore her only black dress, a simple thing she had bought for a funeral years ago. It was modest, hitting her knees, with long sleeves. She felt woefully underdressed compared to the women in shimmering gowns gliding through the main doors. "Name?" the bouncer asked. He was a mountain of a man with a scar running through his eyebrow. "Lena Hart," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I was told to come to the VIP entrance." The bouncer's expression changed instantly. He stepped aside and unhooked the rope. "Mr. Viero is expecting you. Follow me." Mr. Viero, so that was his name. She was led not into the main club, which throbbed with bass and flashing lights, but up a private elevator lined with mirrors. When the doors opened, she stepped into a different world. The noise of the club below was gone, replaced by soft jazz and the clink of crystal. The room was dimly lit, smelling of expensive cigars and aged whiskey. Dark leather booths lined the walls. In the center of the room, sitting alone on a velvet sofa like a king on his throne, was Dominic. He looked up as she entered. He was wearing a charcoal suit tonight, the top button of his shirt undone. His gaze swept over her, taking in the simple black dress, the nervous way she held her hands together. He motioned to the space in front of him. "Come here." Lena walked forward, her legs feeling like lead. She stopped a few feet away. "You came," he said, his voice smooth. "I need the work," she said. Dominic stood up. He moved around the table and circled her slowly. She held her breath, terrified he would touch her, but he kept his hands clasped behind his back. "You aren't going to be scrubbing floors, Lena," he said quietly. "And you aren't going to be serving drinks to the general public." He stopped in front of her, forcing her to look up at him. "You will work here, in the VIP suite. You will serve drinks. You will keep the ashtrays clean. You will be silent, and you will be invisible." He paused, his eyes darkening. "But most importantly, you will serve only one person, me." Lena blinked, confused. "Just you?" "Just me," Dominic confirmed. "No one else orders you around. No one else looks at you. Do we have a deal?" It sounded too simple. And yet, looking into his eyes, Lena knew that being the sole focus of Dominic Viero was far more dangerous than serving 100 strangers. But then she heard Jake's coughing in the back of her mind. She thought of the $400 for the inhaler. "How much does it cost?" she asked. Dominic smirked, a dangerous, knowing expression. "Enough to make all your problems go away, or enough to create new ones. That depends on you." He held out his hand. "Welcome to my world, Lena." She hesitated, then placed her small, rough hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, engulfing hers. As his skin touched hers, she felt a shiver race up her spine, a warning, or perhaps a promise. "Thank you, Mr. Viero," she whispered. "Dominic," he corrected, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Call me Dominic." The Onyx Lounge operated on a different frequency than the rest of the world. Downstairs, the bass thrummed through the floorboards, a rhythmic heartbeat that drove the masses to drink and dance until they forgot their names. But upstairs, in the private glass-walled sanctuary that belonged to Dominic Vieiro, the silence was heavy and expensive. For the past week, Lena Hart had existed in this silence. Her routine was rigid, dictated by the terse instructions of Dominic's head of security, a hulking man named Marco, who looked at her as if she were a stray cat that had wandered into a lion's den. She arrived at 9 in the evening. She changed into the uniform provided for her, a sleek, high-necked black dress that was elegant but far more fitted than anything she would have chosen for herself. She went up the private elevator, and then she waited. Dominic was not like the customers she was used to at the diner. He did not make small talk. He did not complain about the ice in his drink, half the time. He did not even acknowledge her presence. He would sit in his leather armchair, staring out at the skyline of Northport City, a tumbler of amber liquid resting untouched on the table beside him. Lena stood in the shadows near the bar, her hands clasped in front of her, trying to make herself invisible. But she could feel his eyes on her, even when he was looking at paperwork or typing on his phone or speaking in low, dangerous tones to the men who came in and out of the room. His awareness of her was a physical weight. It was a cold, predatory observation. He was dissecting her. "Your brother," Dominic said suddenly, breaking a silence that had lasted for over an hour. He didn't turn his head from the window. Lena jumped slightly, the movement causing the ice tongs she was holding to clink against the silver bucket. "Sir, you mentioned you needed money. You have a brother." Dominic turned the heavy leather chair slowly to face her. "Jake, is that his name?" Lena stiffened. She hadn't told him Jake's name. She hadn't told him anything beyond her own name and her phone number. "I didn't tell you that. I make it my business to know who I allow in this room." "Lena," he said, his voice devoid of apology. "He is sick. He has a chronic respiratory condition," Lena said defensively, her chin lifting. "It's manageable." "It's expensive," Dominic corrected. He watched her reaction, his dark eyes unreadable. "Is that why you scratched my car? Were you distracted? Worrying about how to pay for his next round of meds?" "It was an accident," she insisted, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "And I'm working it off, just like we agreed." "So you are." He took a sip of his drink, his gaze lingering on her hands. "Tell me, Lena, why stay in Northport? A girl like you, with a clean record and a soft heart, the city eats people like you alive. Why haven't you run?" "Because this is where we live," she said simply. "And running costs money I don't have." Dominic hummed, a low sound in his throat. "Loyalty or stupidity. The line is often thin." He went back to his paperwork, dismissing her as abruptly as he had engaged her. Lena let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. She couldn't read him. One moment he seemed ready to have her thrown out the window, and the next, he was asking questions that felt uncomfortably intimate. Later that night, Lena went downstairs to the employee locker room to grab a fresh towel. The atmosphere in the main staff area was tense. The other servers, women with hardened eyes and sharp smiles, gave her a wide berth. They knew where she worked. They knew who she belonged to for the night. One of them, a redhead named Mara, who had been working at the Onyx for 5 years, cornered Lena near the sinks. "You're the new girl in the fishbowl," Mara said, lighting a cigarette despite the no smoking sign. She exhaled a cloud of gray smoke toward the ceiling. "I'm just working off a debt," Lena muttered, trying to move past her. Mara laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Honey, nobody just works off a debt with Dominic Vieiro. You think you're special because he pulled you upstairs? You're just the flavor of the month." Lena paused. He doesn't touch me." Mara's expression shifted from mockery to genuine pity. "That's worse. If he's touching you, he's bored and he'll move on. If he's just watching you, that means he's thinking. And trust me, you don't want a man like Vero thinking about you. Women don't last long around him. They either break or they disappear. Get out while you can." The warning chilled Lena to the bone. She wanted to tell Mara that she couldn't get out, that she was trapped by a $5,000 scratch on a luxury car, but she kept her mouth shut. When she returned to the VIP room, Dominic was pouring himself another drink. The bottle of whiskey was rare, older than she was. He looked up as the elevator doors slid open. "Come here," he commanded. Lena walked over, stopping at a respectful distance. "Closer." She stepped forward until her knees bumped the edge of the low table in front of him. He was sitting forward, his elbows on his knees, the glass dangling loosely from his fingers. He looked tired. The mask of the ruthless boss had slipped, revealing a human exhaustion underneath. "Sit," he said, nodding to the empty space on the sofa beside him. I'm not supposed to sit, sir. The rules, my rules," he cut in softly. "Sit down, Lena." She sat on the very edge of the velvet cushion, rigid as a board. She was close enough to smell the sandalwood soap he used and the sharp tang of the alcohol. Her heart was beating so loud she feared he could hear it in the quiet room. Dominic turned his head to look at her. Up close. His eyes were not just black. They were a deep, fractured obsidian filled with shadows. He set his glass down and reached out. Lena froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. She expected him to grab her, to pull her in, to demand the payment she had feared from the beginning. Instead, his hand moved with agonizing slowness. His fingers, rough and warm, brushed against her cheek. He tucked a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear, his knuckles grazing the sensitive skin of her neck. The touch was electric. It sent a shockwave through her nervous system that made her toes curl. It wasn't aggressive. It was almost reverent. "You're trembling," he murmured. "I'm afraid of you," she whispered, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "Good," he said, but his eyes softened. "You should be, but you're still here. Anyone else would have run by now." His hand lingered on her neck, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. He wasn't restraining her, but she felt utterly unable to move. "You're not like the rest," Dominic said, his voice low and contemplative. "I don't know if that's a good thing, for you or for me." He pulled his hand away abruptly, the loss of contact leaving a strange cold spot on her skin. He stood up and walked to the intercom on the wall. "Marco," he said to the speaker, "bring the car around. Take Miss Hart home." He turned back to her. "Go. Get some sleep. You look like you're about to collapse." Lena stumbled out of the room, her mind reeling. She had expected cruelty. She had expected indifference. She had not expected this strange, simmering tension that felt dangerously like attraction. Days bled into a week. The pattern continued. Dominic summoned her every night. Sometimes he ignored her for hours. Other times, he asked her questions about her favorite books, about what she studied before she dropped out of college, about the diner. He never asked about her love life, and he never spoke about his work. He never touched her again. He just watched. It was psychological torture, and yet. Lena found herself anticipating the summons. She found herself looking for the flash of approval in his eyes when she anticipated his needs, pouring his water before he asked, or closing the blinds when the city lights became too bright. She was drawn to him. It was a terrifying realization. He was a monster. The city whispered his name in fear, but to her, he was a protector in the shadows. He was the only person in her life who didn't ask her for anything. He just wanted her presence. But the reality of his world was bound to crash into hers eventually. It happened on a Tuesday. The club was closed to the public, but Dominic had called her in. When she arrived, the main floor was empty, the chairs upturned on the tables. The silence was eerie. Marco met her at the door. He looked grim. "He's downstairs, basement level. He said to bring the med kit." Lena's stomach twisted. "The basement? Just go." She grabbed the first aid box from behind the bar, her hands shaking. She had never been to the basement. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into hell. When the doors opened, the smell hit her first. Iron and bleach. The room was concrete, stark and cold. In the center, tied to a wooden chair, was a man Lena didn't recognize. His face was a ruin of purple and red. He was unconscious. His head lolling onto his chest, Dominic stood over him. He had discarded his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was rolled up to the elbows, and his knuckles were split and bleeding. There was a splatter of crimson on his collar. He looked up as Lena entered. His chest was heaving. His face twisted in a mask of cold, unadulterated rage. It was the face of the mafia boss, the killer, the man everyone feared. Lena gasped, dropping the med kit. The plastic box clattered loudly on the concrete floor. Dominic didn't flinch. He stared at her, his eyes wild. "I told you to bring it here. I didn't tell you to come inside," Marco said. Lena's voice failed. She looked at the man in the chair. Is he, he's alive," Dominic said, his voice devoid of emotion. "For now. He sold information to the Marcellos. He sold out my men. 3 of them are in the hospital because of him." Dominic stepped away from the chair, wiping his bloody hands on a rag. He walked toward Lena. She wanted to back away. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get back in the elevator and never look back. This was violence. This was the ugliness she had tried to ignore. But she didn't move. She stood her ground, her eyes locked on his. Dominic stopped a foot away. He smelled of sweat and violence. "You see this?" He gestured to the room, to the blood. "This is who I am. Lena, this is what pays for the suits and the whiskey. You should be scared of me. You should be terrified." Lena looked at his hands. His right hand was badly cut, a deep gash across the knuckles where he must have connected with bone. Blood dripped from his fingertips onto the concrete. "You're hurt," she said softly. Dominic blinked, taken aback. "What? Your hand. You're bleeding." She knelt down and opened the med kit. Her hands were trembling, but her movements were precise. She pulled out the antiseptic and the gauze. Standing up, she reached for his hand. Dominic flinched, pulling back slightly. "Don't. Let me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You're making a mess." She took his hand. It was heavy and lethal, capable of ending a life. But in her grasp, it remained still. She poured the antiseptic over the cut. Dominic hissed, his jaw tightening, but he didn't pull away. Lena dabbed at the wound, cleaning away the blood of the other man to reveal Dominic's skin beneath. She worked in silence. The only sound in the room was the ragged breathing of the man in the chair and the hum of the ventilation system. When she finished, she wrapped the gauze tightly around his knuckles and secured it with tape. She didn't let go of his hand immediately. She traced the bandage with her thumb, looking down at his battered skin. "Why didn't you run?" Dominic asked. His voice was a hoarse whisper. Stripped of its usual command, Lena looked up. His eyes were searching hers, desperate for an answer she didn't fully understand herself. "Because you're hurt," she said. "And I'm not afraid of you, Dominic. I'm afraid for you." The air between them shifted. It became heavy, charged with a desperate kind of energy. Dominic stepped closer, invading her space, his body heat radiating against hers. He used his uninjured hand to cup her face, tilting her head back. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. He was breathing heavier now, the adrenaline of the violence mixing with something else, something raw and wanting. "You're making this difficult, Ma," he murmured, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "I'm trying to keep you out of this. I'm trying to keep you clean." "Maybe I don't want to be clean," Lena whispered, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his chest. Dominic closed his eyes for a second, as if in pain. Then he stepped back, breaking the contact. The loss of his touch felt like a physical blow. "Go home, Lena," he rasped, turning his back on her. "Get out of here before I change my mind." Lena sat on the rusted balcony of her apartment, clutching a mug of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The city noises drifted up from below, sirens, shouting, the rumble of traffic. She stared at her hands. She could still feel the phantom weight of Dominic's hand in hers. She could still smell the metallic tang of the blood in the basement. She should call the police. She should quit. She should take Jake and move to another state. That was what a sane person would do. But she wasn't thinking like a sane person. She was thinking about the way Dominic's eyes had softened when she bandaged his hand. She was thinking about the loneliness she sensed in him, a black hole that matched the emptiness in her own life. Was she being manipulated? Was this Stockholm Syndrome? Or was it something real? He had beaten a man half to death, yet he had sent her home in a luxury car to ensure her safety. He was a contradiction she couldn't solve. Inside the apartment, Jake was sleeping soundly for the first time in weeks. His breathing was steady. Lena felt a surge of protectiveness. She couldn't leave Northport. Not with Jake's doctors here. Not with their lives anchored to this concrete. She was trapped, and God help her. She didn't want to break free if it meant never seeing Dominic again. Across the city, in the penthouse office above the Onyx, Dominic sat at his mahogany desk. His hand throbbed beneath the white gauze Lena had applied. He flexed his fingers, testing the pain. It centered him. On the desk in front of him was a manila folder. He opened it with his left hand. Inside was the dossier he had ordered on Lena Hart. It was thin. She had no criminal record, no debts other than the recent medical ones, no living relatives other than her brother. Dominic picked up the medical summary for Jacob Hart: severe asthma, complications from pneumonia, frequent hospitalizations. The outstanding balance at Northport General was staggering. It was enough to crush anyone, let alone a 23-year-old waitress working for tips. He looked at the photo of Lena clipped to the file. It was a grainy picture from her driver's license, but even there, her eyes held that quiet defiance that drove him mad. She was drowning, and she was too proud to scream for help. Dominic picked up his phone and dialed a number. "It's Viero," he said when the line connected. "I need a transfer made to the billing department of Northport General. Account number ending in 452. Pay it off." "The whole thing, boss?" the voice on the other end asked, sounding surprised. "That's over $12,000. "Pay it," Dominic ordered, "and set up a recurring transfer for any future charges on that account. Make sure it's anonymous. If she finds out it came from me, I'll have your head." "Understood. Anything else?" "Yeah, the landlord for the building on 4th Street, the one owned by the slumlords. Contact them. Tell them apartment 4B has a benefactor. Her rent is covered for the next year." "Done." Dominic hung up. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He told himself it was just payment. She was working for him. He was taking care of his assets. It was practical. But deep down, he knew it was a lie. He wasn't paying her. He was keeping her. He was weaving a net of safety around her so tight that nothing in this miserable city could touch her. Because if something happened to her, if that light in her eyes was extinguished by the darkness of his world, he knew, with terrifying certainty, that he would burn the city to the ground to avenge her. 2 days later, Lena checked her mailbox in the lobby of her building. There was an envelope from the landlord. Her stomach tightened. They were late on rent again. She braced herself for an eviction notice. She tore open the envelope. Inside was a receipt. Paid in full. Balance, 0. Credit applied for 12 months. Lena stared at the paper. Her hands began to shake. She checked the name. It was her apartment. It was her name. "Jake," she called out, running up the stairs. She burst into the apartment. "Jake, did you talk to anyone about the rent?" Jake looked up from his book, confused. "No? Why?" "It's paid," she breathed, sinking onto the sofa. "Someone paid our rent for a year." "What?" Jake's eyes went wide. "Who?" "I don't know," Lena whispered. She looked at the receipt again. There was no name listed for the payer, just anonymous. Suspicion crept in, cold and sharp, mingling with the overwhelming relief. She thought of the black car. She thought of the man with the bruised knuckles and the tailored suits. Money isn't the only currency. She closed her eyes. She knew who it was. She should be angry. She should be indignant that he was interfering in her life, buying her safety like he bought everything else. But as she listened to the radiator hiss, filling the apartment with warmth they usually couldn't afford, she felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room, knowing he couldn't hear her, and terrified of what it meant that she was grateful. The air outside the Onyx Lounge was crisp, biting at Lena's exposed skin as she stepped out of the service entrance. It was 3 a.m. The city was asleep, but it was a restless slumber, full of distant sirens and the hum of street lamps buzzing overhead. Lena pulled her coat tighter around her frame. She'd been working for Dominic Viero for 2 weeks now. The routine had settled into her bones, the quiet tension of the VIP room, the weight of his gaze, the ride home in the back of a luxury sedan. But tonight, she had insisted on walking to the bus stop a few blocks away. The luxury car service made her feel indebted, a feeling that sat heavy in her stomach alongside the confusing warmth of his attention. She needed the cold air. She needed to remember who she was outside of his velvet-lined world. She turned the corner onto 4th Street. The sidewalk was empty, slick with the remnants of yesterday's rain. The sound of her own footsteps echoed against the brick facades of the closed shops. Then, the rhythm changed. Lena stopped. Behind her, the scrape of a boot against concrete scuffed the silence. She gripped her purse strap, her heart beginning a frantic gallop against her ribs. She started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps behind her matched her pace. She wasn't alone. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her system. She passed under a flickering streetlight and risked a glance over her shoulder. A man was there, 20 feet back. He was dressed in a nondescript gray hoodie, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He wasn't walking with purpose, he was stalking. Lena broke into a run. Her breath tore at her throat. She needed to get to the main avenue where there might be a taxi or a police car. She heard the heavy thud of boots pounding the pavement behind her. He was running, too. "Hey, slow down, sweetheart," the man called out, his voice rough and slurred. Lena didn't answer. She turned another corner, aiming for the brightly lit parking garage near the theater district, hoping the security guard was on duty. She was 10 feet from the entrance when a hand clamped down on her shoulder. Spinning her around, she screamed, the sound ripping through the quiet night. The man shoved her back against the rough brick wall of the alley entrance. Up close, he smelled of stale beer and aggression. "Told you to slow down," he grunted, leaning in, before Lena could struggle, before she could even process the terror seizing her limbs. A shadow detached itself from the darkness across the street. There was no shouting, no warning, just a blur of motion. A massive figure collided with her attacker. The sound of the impact was sickening, flesh hitting brick with bone-shattering force. The man in the gray hoodie didn't even have time to cry out before he was thrown to the ground. Lena pressed herself against the wall, gasping for air. Standing over the groaning man was Marco, Dominic's head of security. He looked calm, almost bored, as if he were taking out the trash rather than neutralizing a threat. 2 other men in dark suits materialized from the shadows. One of them grabbed the attacker by the collar and dragged him toward a waiting black van that had pulled up silently to the curb. Marco adjusted his suit jacket and turned to Lena. "Mister, Viero prefers you take the car. Miss Hart, this is why—" Lena's knees gave way. She slid down the wall, trembling uncontrollably. It wasn't just the attack that terrified her. It was the efficiency of the rescue. They had been watching her, shadowing her. She wasn't just a waitress walking home. She was bait in a game she didn't understand. The black van sped away with the attacker inside. A sleek sedan pulled up in its place. The back window rolled down. Dominic sat in the shadows of the back seat. He didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead, his jaw set in a line of granite tension. "Get in," he said. It wasn't a request. Lena scrambled into the car, the warmth of the leather interior enveloping her. She sat as far away from him as possible, pressing herself against the door. The car moved, gliding through the streets toward the private garage beneath the club. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Dominic didn't speak until they were parked in the underground structure beneath the Onyx. He signaled for the driver to leave when the door clicked shut, leaving them alone in the dim concrete cavern. He finally turned to her. "You," he said, his voice low and vibrating with suppressed anger, "are reckless." "I just wanted to walk," Lena whispered, her voice shaking. "I didn't know." "You didn't know that walking around this city at 3 a.m. is dangerous?" Dominic cut her off. He unbuckled his seatbelt and shifted, turning his entire body toward her. Or did you think that because you work for me, the wolves wouldn't come sniffing? I didn't think it had anything to do with you, Lena snapped, fear turning into defensive anger. I'm just a waitress. Dominic, why would anyone care? Dominic laughed, a dark, humorless sound. He reached out, his hand moving so fast she flinched. He grasped her chin, his fingers firm but not painful, forcing her to look at him. You are the only woman allowed in my private suite, he said, his eyes searching hers. You are the only person I have paid a debt for without asking for blood in return. People talk, Lena, and when people talk, enemies listen. That man wasn't a random drunk. He was sent to see how much you matter to me. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. He was testing you? He was testing my protection, Dominic corrected, and he found out exactly what happens when he crosses that line. He released her chin, his hand sliding down to rest on the leather seat behind her neck. He wasn't touching her, but his arm formed a barrier, caging her in. You don't get to walk into my world and stay untouched, he said softly. The moment you stepped into that room, the moment you bandaged my hand, you became part of this. The pain is already on you. Lena stared at him, her chest heaving. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was in danger not because of who she was, but because of who he was. Are you protecting me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Or are you claiming me? Dominic held her gaze. The shadows of the garage made his eyes look like deep pools of ink. He leaned in closer until she could feel the warmth of his breath on her lips. For a heart-stopping second, she thought he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to. The desire was a sudden, terrifying spike in her blood. What is the difference? Dominic murmured. He pulled back before she could answer. He opened his door and stepped out into the concrete expanse. Go home, Lena, he said, his back to her. Marco will drive you, and from now on, you take the damn car. He walked toward the elevator without looking back, vanishing into the darkness of his fortress. The apartment smelled of sickness. It was a distinct scent, old medicine, humidity, and fear. When Lena unlocked the door, the sound of coughing greeted her. It was a wet, rattling sound that made her lungs ache in sympathy. She dropped her purse and ran to the living room. Jake was sitting up on the couch, clutching his chest. His face was pale, beads of sweat standing out on his forehead. The nebulizer machine was humming on the coffee table, but he looked like he was drowning in the open air. Jake? Lena fell to her knees beside him. Did you take the treatment? Doesn't work, Jake gasped, his eyes wide with panic. Chest, tight. Lena grabbed the emergency inhaler from the table and pressed it into his hand. Breathe with me. Slow, in, out. It took an hour for his breathing to stabilize, an hour of Lena holding his hand, terrified that this would be the night she had to call an ambulance she couldn't afford, despite Dominic's help with the bills. When he finally fell into a restless sleep, Lena sat on the floor, her back against the sofa, and cried. She couldn't do this. The money Dominic provided was a lifeline. Yes. But the danger? The man in the alley? If they knew about her, they would find out about Jake. They would use him to get to Dominic. She was exposing her sick brother to a war he couldn't fight. She had to quit. She had to take Jake and leave Northport, go somewhere small, somewhere nobody knows the name Viero. The decision settled in her chest, heavy and cold as a stone. The next afternoon, she didn't wait for her shift. She texted the number on the black card. I need to see you. Please. Dominic didn't reply with a time. He replied with a location, a quiet park near the riverfront, neutral ground. When she arrived, he was standing by the railing, looking out at the gray water. He wore a long wool coat, his hands deep in his pockets. He looked like a statue of solitude. Lena walked up to him. She had rehearsed what she was going to say, but looking at his sharp profile, the words stuck in her throat. You want to leave, Dominic said without turning around. Lena blinked. How did you know? Because you're smart, he said. He turned to face her. The wind whipped his dark hair across his forehead. You realized last night that being near me puts a target on your back. It puts a target on my brother, Lena said, her voice breaking. I can't risk him. Dominic, I can't. I'm grateful for the money. I'm grateful for everything. But I have to quit. I'm taking Jake and we're leaving the city. Dominic looked at her, his expression unreadable. And where? Do you have savings? Do you have a job lined up in another state? How will you move him in his condition? We'll figure it out, Lena said stubbornly. We always do. You'll starve, Dominic said bluntly. Or he'll get sick on the road and you won't have the insurance to cover the emergency room. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. And it won't matter, he added, his voice dropping. Leaving won't make you safe. Not anymore. What do you mean? I told you. Lena, you're known. My enemies, the Marcellos. They are thorough. They know your face. They know your name. If you leave my protection now, you are just a loose end, a vulnerability they can exploit to see if I still care. Lena felt the cold wind cut through her coat. So I'm trapped? No, Dominic said fiercely. He reached out and took her hands. His grip was warm, grounding. You're not trapped. You are under my protection. There is a difference. You can't watch us 24 hours a day, she argued, trying to pull her hands away. But he held on. I can, he vowed, and I will. I will guard you and your brother with everything I have. No one touches you. No one even looks at you wrong. I promise you this. Why? Lena asked, tears welling in her eyes. Why would you do that for a waitress who scratched your car? Dominic looked at her hands in his. He ran his thumb over her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. Because, he whispered, you are the only real thing I have found in a very long time. That night, the buzzer to her apartment rang. Lena checked the peephole. It was Dominic. He was alone. No guards, no entourage, just him, standing in the grim hallway of her tenement building holding a brown paper bag. She opened the door. What are you doing here? Fulfilling a promise, he said. Checking the perimeter. He walked in. The apartment was small, the furniture mismatched and worn, but he didn't look at it with judgment. He looked at it with a quiet respect. His eyes immediately went to the couch where Jake was sleeping, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Dominic's expression softened, the hard lines around his mouth relaxed. He looked less like a mafia don and more like a man who understood the weight of caring for someone fragile. Is that him? Dominic asked softly. Yes, Lena said. That's Jake. Dominic nodded. He walked to the kitchen counter and set down the paper bag. I brought tea, the good kind, not the dust you buy at the corner store. Lena stared at him. You brought tea? And dinner, he added, though I suspect it might be cold by now. It was surreal. Dominic Viero, the king of Northport, standing in her tiny kitchenette, unpacking takeout containers and a tin of loose-leaf tea. Lena moved to help him. They worked in silence, a strange domestic rhythm settling between them. She boiled the water, he found the mugs. They sat at her small, scratched kitchen table, the steam from the tea curling between them. Tell me, Dominic said, wrapping his hands around the ceramic mug. Tell me how you ended up here. How did you lose them? Your parents? Lena looked into her tea. She rarely spoke about it. It was an old wound, but one that still bled when touched. But with Dominic, the walls she had built seemed to crumble effortlessly. It was a car accident, she said quietly. 6 years ago, a drunk driver ran a red light. They died instantly. I was 18. Jake was 12. Dominic listened, his gaze intense and unwavering. I was supposed to go to art school, she continued, a sad smile touching her lips. I had a scholarship, but then, well, there was no one else. The state wanted to put Jake in foster care because of his medical needs. They said I couldn't handle it. So you proved them wrong, Dominic said. I dropped out. Lena said, I got a job at the diner. I fought the court for custody. I kept us together. That's all that mattered. She looked up at him. That's why I can't let anything happen to him. Dominic, he's my whole world. I gave up my life for him. Dominic reached across the table. He didn't take her hand this time. He touched her wrist, his fingers sliding up to rest on her pulse point. You gave up your dreams, he corrected gently. Not your life. Your life is still happening. Lena, you've just been spending it surviving. He stood up and moved around the table. Lena turned in her chair to face him. He looked down at her, his eyes dark with an emotion she couldn't name, something between sorrow and adoration. You're too good for this world, he murmured. Too good for the grime, too good for the struggle, and definitely too good for a man like me. The air in the kitchen grew heavy, charged with the electricity that had been humming between them since the first night in the alley. Lena stood up. She was inches from him. She could smell the rain on his coat and the sandalwood soap on his skin. Dominic, she breathed. He lifted his hand and cupped her face. His thumb traced her lower lip, causing it to tremble. He was waiting. He was giving her the choice. He could take whatever he wanted. He was a man who took, but he was waiting for her to give. Lena made her choice. She leaned into his touch. The tension snapped. Dominic lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't the kiss of a conqueror. It was slow, agonizingly tender. His lips moved against hers with a reverence that made her knees weak. He tasted tea and danger. It was a question, a request for permission, and when she sighed against his mouth, opening to him, he groaned low in his throat. His arms went around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. Lena buried her hands in his hair, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming desperate, pouring out of all the fear and longing she had been carrying for weeks. He kissed her like she was glass, something precious that could break if he held it too tight, but something he couldn't bear to let go of. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. Dominic rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. His hands were still on her waist, holding her steady. "I can't lose you," he whispered, his voice ragged. "I can't lose you, Lena, even if I haven't had you yet." Lena held on to him, her heart pounding against his, in the safety of his arms. With her brother sleeping in the next room and the city prowling outside, she realized she had stopped running. She had walked straight into the fire, and for the first time in years, she wasn't cold. The world around Lena Hart had shrunk. It had contracted until it fit inside the back seat of a black armored sedan and the four walls of her apartment, which was no longer just a home, but a fortress. For the last week, a shadow had followed her. His name was Enzo. He was a man of few words and even fewer expressions, a monolith in a dark suit who stood outside the diner while she worked her notice period, and who sat in the lobby of her apartment building while she slept. He was the physical manifestation of Dominic Viero's promise, "I will guard you." But protection felt suffocatingly similar to captivity. Lena walked out of the diner for the last time, handing in her apron. The rain had returned to Northport, a relentless drizzle that turned the city into a watercolor painting of grays and blacks. Enzo was there immediately, holding an umbrella over her head before the first drop could touch her hair. "The car is waiting. Miss Hart," he said, his voice gravelly. "I can walk to the curb." "Enzo," Lena said, clutching her purse. "I'm not made of glass." "Mr. Viero's orders," Enzo replied, immovable. She got into the car. Dominic was not there. He had been distant for the last 3 days, consumed by a darkness she could sense but couldn't see. The air in the city was changing. Even Lena, who lived on the periphery of his world, could feel the static charge of violence building up. People were whispering. At the Onyx Lounge, the staff had stopped making snide comments about her. Now, they just looked at her with wide, fearful eyes. The rumor was out. The waitress belonged to Viero, and in Northport, belonging to Viero meant you were a target. The name Marcello had begun to circulate like a contagion. Leon Marcello, a rival Don, a man who viewed Dominic's territory not as a boundary but as a challenge. The car didn't take her home. It took her to the Onyx. When Lena arrived, the club was closed, but the tension inside was palpable. Men were moving quickly, carrying files, checking weapons. Marco met her at the elevator. "He's in the office," Marco said. "Don't knock." Lena rode the elevator up, her stomach twisting. When the doors opened, she heard Dominic's voice. It was not the soft, baritone rumble she had heard in her kitchen over tea. It was cold, sharp, and absolutely lethal. "I don't care about the collateral," Dominic was saying into his phone. He was standing by the window, his silhouette framed against the stormy skyline. "Burn it, burn the whole warehouse. If Marcello wants to move shipments through my port, he pays the tax. Since he refused to pay, he lost the product. End it." He hung up. The finality of those two words, "end it," chilled Lena to the bone. He had just ordered the destruction of a building, perhaps the deaths of men, with the same tone one might use to order coffee. He turned and saw her. The mask of the Don didn't slip immediately. For a second, he looked at her with the eyes of a killer, flat, assessing, dangerous. Then he blinked, and the man she knew returned. "Lena," he said, exhaling a long breath. "I didn't hear you come in." "You were busy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Burning things." Dominic walked over to his desk and poured a glass of water. His hand was steady. "Necessary business. How is Jake?" The whiplash was dizzying. A moment ago, he was ordering arson. Now he was asking about her brother's health with genuine concern. "He's better," Lena said, struggling to reconcile the two versions of him. "The new medication helps." "Good," Dominic said. He reached under his desk and pulled out a thermal container. "I had the chef prepare a bone broth. It's good for the immune system. Take it to him tonight." Lena stared at the silver container. "You ordered a hit, and then you got soup for my brother?" Dominic set the container down. He walked around the desk, stopping a few feet from her. "I do what is necessary to maintain my position, Lena, and I do what is necessary to care for the people who matter to me. I don't have the luxury of separating the two." "It scares me," she admitted. "Not the danger outside, but how easily you switch it off." Dominic reached out, his fingers grazing her arm. "I never switch it off. I just carry it. But tonight I want to put it down." He looked at her with a raw intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. "Come with me," he said. "Not to the apartment, not to the club, somewhere else." The drive took an hour. They left the sprawling, suffocating grid of Northport City and headed north, where the concrete gave way to dense pine forests and rocky cliffs overlooking the ocean. Dominic drove himself this time. The silence in the car was not heavy. It was expectant. They arrived at a private villa perched on the edge of a cliff. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all stone and glass. Hidden from the road by high walls and iron gates, it felt less like a home and more like a fortress of solitude. Inside, the villa was warm. A massive fireplace dominated the living room, the flames casting dancing shadows against the high ceilings. The sound of the ocean crashing against the rocks below was a distant, rhythmic lullaby. Dominic poured 2 glasses of red wine and handed one to her. He took off his jacket, tossing it carelessly onto a chair, and loosened his tie. It was the most undone she had ever seen him. They sat on the rug in front of the fire. For a long time, they just watched the flames. "I bought this place 5 years ago," Dominic said quietly. "I thought it would be an escape. A place where I could be just Dominic, not Viero, but I realized quickly that you can't leave a shadow behind. It stays attached to your feet." "Is that how it feels?" Lena asked, tucking her legs underneath her. "Like a shadow?" "Like a weight," he corrected. He took a sip of wine. "My father built this empire on fear. He ruled by the gun. When he was killed, I had a choice. Let it crumble and be devoured by the wolves like Marcello, or build the walls higher. I built them higher." He turned to look at her, the firelight illuminating the sharp angles of his face. "I hate it," he confessed. The admission was shocking. "I hate the fear in people's eyes. I hate that when I walk into a room. The air leaves it. I have spent 10 years being a monster so that no one else could be a monster to me." Lena set her glass down. She moved closer to him. "You're not a monster. Dominic, a monster wouldn't care about a sick boy he's never met. A monster wouldn't have stopped in that alley. I stopped because of the note," he said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. Because you were the first person in a decade who thought I was owed an apology, not a bribe." He reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, his grip desperate. "I'm so tired, Lena," he whispered. "I'm surrounded by armies, and I have never been more alone." Lena's heart broke for him. She saw the boy he must have been, buried under layers of armor and violence. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the tension in his brow. "You're not alone," she said softly. "Not right now." Dominic turned his face into her palm, closing his eyes. He let out a shuddering breath. "No, not right now." The atmosphere shifted. The sorrow in the room began to transmute into something else, something heavier, hotter. Dominic opened his eyes, and they were dark with need. He leaned in, capturing her lips in a slow, searing kiss. It wasn't like the first time in her kitchen. This was deeper, hungrier. It was a plea. Lena melted into him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down. The fire crackled beside them, but the heat between them was far more intense. Dominic pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against hers. "Are you sure?" he rasped. "Because once I have you, I'm never letting you go." "I'm sure," Lena whispered. "I choose this. I choose you." He kissed her again, and this time, he didn't stop. His hands moved over her, reverent and trembling. He undressed her slowly, peeling away the layers of her clothes as if he were unwrapping a priceless artifact. He paused to kiss the skin he exposed, her shoulder, the pulse at her throat, the curve of her waist. When she reached for his shirt, fumbling with the buttons, he helped her. When his shirt fell away, she saw the scars. There was a silver line across his ribs, a puckered mark on his shoulder, a map of violence etched into his skin. Lena traced the scar on his ribs with her fingertips. Dominic flinched, not from pain, but from the vulnerability of being seen. "It's ugly," he muttered. "It's survival," she whispered. She kissed the scar. Dominic groaned, a low sound that vibrated in his chest. He laid her back against the soft rug. He moved over her, his weight settling between her thighs, grounding her. The intimacy that followed was slow and agonizingly beautiful. It wasn't rushed. There was no frantic tearing of clothes. It was a conversation without words. Dominic moved with a restraint that cost him. His muscles corded with the effort to be gentle. He watched her face, tracking every emotion, every hitch of breath. When they finally joined, Lena gasped, arching into him. It felt inevitable. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Dominic buried his face in the curve of her neck. "Lena," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. He moved with a slow, deep rhythm, worshipping her body with his own. Lena held him, anchoring him to the earth. For the first time, the king of Northport wasn't in charge. He was unraveled. He was simply a man, seeking solace in the arms of the woman who had seen him later. As the fire burned down to embers, they lay tangled together under a thick fur throw. Dominic held her tight against his chest, his arm draped protectively over her waist. He kissed the top of her head. "You're mine now," he whispered into the darkness. The words possessed a weight that terrified and thrilled her. "That means they'll never touch you. I will burn the world down before I let them touch you." Lena drifted to sleep with the sound of his heart beating steadily against her ear, a drum of war and love. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, gray and soft. Lena woke alone in the massive bed in the master bedroom. Dominic must have carried her there in the night. She stretched, her body aching in a way that made her flush with the memory of the night before. She reached out to the empty side of the bed. The sheets were cold. On the nightstand, propped against a crystal lamp, was a thick manila envelope. Lena sat up, pulling the silk sheet around her. She picked up the envelope. It was heavy. Inside was a stack of documents. She unfolded the top one. It was a letter from the Northport Specialist Respiratory Center, the best facility in the state, a place Lena had only dreamed of sending Jake. Patient Jacob Hart. Status admitted. Treatment plan, full pulmonary rehabilitation. Experimental therapy, 24-hour care, cost covered in full. Lena flipped through the pages. There were receipts, 5 years of treatment, prepaid. The sum at the bottom of the invoice was a number so large she couldn't even comprehend it in spoken words. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. Dominic hadn't just paid a bill. He had bought her brother a future. Her heart swelled with gratitude so sharp it felt like pain. But beneath the gratitude, a cold seed of dread began to sprout. This was blood money. She knew where this money came from. It came from the fear she saw in people's eyes. It came from the collateral Dominic had spoken of on the phone. It came from the violence she had witnessed in the basement. She looked around the luxurious room. Can I do this, she asked herself? Can I live in this world? Can I accept a life built on the suffering of others, even if it saves the person I love most? The door opened. Dominic walked in. He was dressed in fresh clothes, black slacks and a black sweater. He held 2 mugs of coffee. He looked rested, younger than he had yesterday. He saw the papers in her hands. He stopped. I didn't leave that there to buy you, he said quietly, setting the coffee down on the dresser. I did it because I could. It's too much, Dominic, Lena said, her voice shaking. This is a fortune. It's paper, he dismissed. It means nothing to me. His life means something to you. Therefore, it matters. He walked over to the bed and sat on the edge. He reached out to touch her hand, but Lena pulled back slightly. The rejection was minute. But Dominic froze. His eyes hardened instantly, the wall going back up. What is it? He asked. I love you, Lena said. The words hung in the air, fragile and absolute. Dominic's breath hitched. But I don't know if I can live with what you do, she whispered. I saw you order that fire yesterday. I know where this money comes from. I'm trying, Dominic. I really am. But every time I look at you, I see the man who held me last night, and then I see the man who beats people in basements. I feel torn in half. Dominic stared at her. Silence stretched between them, heavy with the things that couldn't be unsaid. I told you, he said slowly. I am a monster. You fell in love with the man, but you are tied to the beast. I want the man, Lena said, tears spilling onto her cheeks. I don't want the beast. Dominic stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the gray ocean. His back was rigid. Then ask me, he said. Lena blinked. What? He turned around. His expression was fierce, desperate. Ask me to stop. Ask me to walk away. If you tell me to burn it all down, not the warehouses, but the empire, I will do it. I will sign the papers. I will hand the keys to my second. I will take you and Jake, and we will go somewhere where no one knows the name Viero. Lena sat up straight, the sheets falling to her waist. You would do that? You would give it all up? I have nothing in this life that is mine, Dominic said, except you. If the price of keeping you is losing the crown, then I will throw it in the ocean. Hope flared in Lena's chest, bright and blinding. Then do it. Please, Dominic, let's go. Let's leave. Dominic looked at her, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. He walked back to the bed and cupped her face in his hands. I will try, he promised. But you need to understand something. Lena, walking away from the Mafia is not like quitting a job at a diner. You don't just hand in your notice. What do you mean? I mean that power abhors a vacuum, Dominic said darkly. If I step down, chaos follows. Marcello will move in. My men will be slaughtered. The balance of the city will break. And even if we leave, the past has a way of hunting you down. He kissed her forehead, a seal of a promise that felt terrifyingly fragile. But for you, he whispered against her skin, I will start the war that ends it all. Lena closed her eyes, leaning into him. She had asked him to choose her over his empire. She had won. But as the wind howled outside the villa, sounding like wolves circling the gate, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just started a countdown to something terrible. The promise of a new life hung in the air like the scent of ozone before a storm. Lena stood on the curb outside the pharmacy, clutching a paper bag containing the travel-sized toiletries she had bought for the trip. Dominic had arranged everything. They were leaving Northport tomorrow morning. just for a week. He had said, a trial run, a glimpse of what life could look like without the weight of the city on their shoulders. Enzo, her silent shadow, stood by the rear door of the armored sedan, scrolling through a message on his phone. The street was busy with the midday rush, a chaotic symphony of taxis and pedestrians that usually made Lena feel safe in her anonymity. But today, the rhythm was off. A gray van screeched to a halt against the flow of traffic, mounting the curb just feet from where Lena stood. Before Enzo could look up, the side door slid open with a violent rattle. Lena turned, her instincts screaming, but she was too slow. 2 men in balaclavas surged out of the vehicle. Enzo dropped his phone, his hand flying to the holster inside his jacket, but a third man stepped out from behind a newsstand and fired a taser. The crackle of electricity was sickeningly loud. Enzo convulsed and hit the pavement hard. "Enzo!" Lena screamed. Dropping her bag, she turned to run, scrambling toward the pharmacy entrance, but a heavy arm clamped around her waist, lifting her feet off the ground. She kicked and clawed, her nails digging into the thick canvas of the man's jacket. She opened her mouth to scream again, but a rough, chemical-smelling cloth was shoved against her face. "Quiet, sweetheart," a voice growled in her ear. "Mister, Marcello sends his regards." The world tilted, the gray pavement, the blue sky, and the shocked faces of the passers-by swirled into a single, nauseating blur. Darkness swallowed her before she could even whisper Dominic's name. The waking was slow and painful. Lena gasped, her lungs burning as she jerked upright. She was seated in a hard, wooden chair. Her wrists zip-tied tightly behind her back. The room was cold and smelled of damp concrete and old rust. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly, casting long, nauseating shadows against peeling walls. She was not dead. That was the first realization. The second was the throbbing pain in her temple. "She's awake," a voice echoed from the corner. Lena blinked, her vision clearing. A man stepped into the light. He was not Leon Marcello. She had seen pictures of the rival Don in the newspapers. This man was younger, with a jagged scar running through his eyebrow and a cruel, bored expression. He dragged a metal stool over and sat in front of her, forcing their knees to touch. "You're prettier than the usual whores Viero keeps," the man said, tilting his head. "I can see why he kept you around." Lena straightened her spine, ignoring the terror fluttering in her chest like a trapped bird. She thought of Dominic. She thought of the way he stood in her kitchen, drinking tea. She borrowed his steel. "I don't know anything," she said, her voice raspy but steady. "So if you're planning to ask questions, you're wasting your time." The man laughed. He reached out and trailed a finger down her cheek. Lena flinched, turning her face away. "We know you don't know anything about the business," he said. "Dominic is careful, paranoid, but that's not why you're here. You're here because you are the only chink in his armor we have found in 10 years. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of peppermint and rot. "We aren't going to torture you for codes or bank accounts. Lena, we're just going to hurt you enough to make him lose his mind. When Dominic Viero gets angry, he gets sloppy. And when he gets sloppy, we put a bullet in his head." He pulled a small, serrated knife from his belt. The light caught the blade. "Please," Lena whispered, her resolve cracking for a fraction of a second. "Don't beg," the man said casually. "It's boring." He pressed the blade against her upper arm. It wasn't a deep cut, but it was slow. Lena cried out, tears springing to her eyes as a line of fire erupted on her skin. Blood welled up, warm and sticky, soaking into the sleeve of her blouse. "There," the man said, wiping the blade on his pant leg. "Just a little scratch. Let's take a picture, shall we? A little motivation for your boyfriend." He pulled out a phone and snapped a photo of her, tear-streaked and bleeding, bound to the chair. "Don't worry," he grinned. "The real show starts when he gets here." Inside the penthouse office of the Onyx Lounge, the silence was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Dominic stood behind his desk. His phone lay on the mahogany surface, the screen glowing with a single image. Lena, bound, bleeding, terrified. His consigliere, A gray-haired man named Silas, who had served Dominic's father, stood by the door. He looked pale. "Dominic," Silas said, his voice low and cautious. "It's a trap. You know it's a trap. Marcello wants you to come to the shipyard. He has snipers set up in the rafters. He wants you exposed." Dominic didn't answer. He was staring at the drop of blood on Lena's arm in the photo. It was a small wound, superficial, but to Dominic it looked like a canyon. They had touched her. They had put their hands on the only thing in the world he had sworn to keep clean. Something inside him snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was the quiet, catastrophic failure of a dam holding back a blackened ocean. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a heavy, matte black handgun. He checked the magazine with mechanical precision and slammed it back into place. "Dominic, listen to me," Silas pleaded, stepping forward. "We sent a tactical team. We send the enforcers. You cannot go in there personally. If you die tonight, the family falls." Dominic looked up. His eyes were voids. There was no humanity left in them, no negotiation, no fear. There was only death. "The family is already dead if she doesn't walk out of there," Dominic said. His voice was devoid of inflection. "Prepare the car." "Dominic, I said prepare the car," Dominic roared, the sound shattering the stillness. He grabbed a second magazine and shoved it into his pocket. "And tell the men that no one in that warehouse survives. Burn it down, burn it all down." The shipyard was a graveyard of rusting containers and abandoned machinery on the edge of the industrial district. Rain had begun to fall again, a torrential downpour that drummed against the metal roof of Warehouse 4. Inside the small office where Lena was held, the man with the scar was pacing. He checked his watch. "He's taking his time," he muttered. "Maybe you aren't worth as much as we thought." Lena hung her head, fighting the dizziness. Her arm throbbed. She prayed Dominic wouldn't come. She prayed he would stay safe in his tower. If he came here, he would die. She knew it. Suddenly, the lights in the warehouse flickered and died. "What the hell?" the man hissed. He grabbed his radio. "Perimeter check. Who cut the power?" Static was the only answer. Then, a single gunshot echoed from the main floor. It was loud, thunderous, unmistakable. Then another and another. The screams started. They weren't the screams of Dominic's men. They were the screams of Marcello's guards. The door to the office shook as something heavy slammed into it from the outside. The man with the scar spun around, raising his weapon. "Watch her!" he yelled to the guard by the door. The lock shattered. The door flew open, torn off its hinges by the force of the kick. Dominic stood in the doorway. He was silhouetted by the muzzle flashes from the hallway behind him. He was soaking wet, his coat gone, his white shirt plastered to his chest and stained with red that wasn't his. He didn't look like a man. He looked like a wraith. The guard by the door raised his gun, but he was too slow. Dominic fired twice. The guard dropped. The man with the scar grabbed Lena, hauling her up by her injured arm and pressing the barrel of his gun to her temple. "Back off," he screamed, his voice cracking. "I'll do it. I swear to God. Viero, I'll paint the wall with her." Dominic stopped. He was 10 feet away. His chest was heaving, but his gun was level, pointing directly at the man's head. He looked at Lena. He saw the cut on her arm, the terror in her eyes, the way she was trembling. The sight seemed to physically pain him. His face twisted in agony. "Let her go," Dominic said. The volume was low, but the threat vibrated through the floorboards. "And I will let you die quickly." "Drop the gun!" the man shrieked, pressing the barrel harder into Lena's skin. Lena met Dominic's eyes. "Dominic," she whispered. "Don't." Dominic didn't drop the gun. He didn't blink. He took a step forward. "You touched her," Dominic said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "You put your hands on her." The man with the scar flinched, his finger tightening on the trigger. In that split second of hesitation, Dominic moved. He fired. The shot was deafening in the small room. The bullet struck the man in the shoulder, spinning him around, his gun discharged uselessly into the ceiling. Dominic crossed the distance in 2 strides. He didn't shoot again. He holstered his weapon and grabbed the man by the throat, slamming him into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. "Leave," Dominic growled to the air. Not looking back, Lena didn't see what happened next. She squeezed her eyes shut as the sounds of violence filled the room. Short, brutal, and final. Then, silence. "Lena?" The voice was broken. Hands, frantic and trembling, were touching her face, her shoulders. A knife sliced through the zip ties on her wrists. She opened her eyes. Dominic was on his knees in front of her. His face was splattered with blood, but his eyes were wide and terrified. He looked like a child who had dropped a precious glass vase. "You're bleeding," he choked out, his eyes fixing on the cut on her arm. "God, you're bleeding. It's just a scratch," she sobbed, falling forward into him. "Dominic, you came. You actually came." He caught her, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking. The man who had just slaughtered a room full of mercenaries was shaking so hard his teeth rattled. "I would burn the whole world for you," he whispered into her skin, his voice raw. "I would kill every single one of them twice. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." He stood up, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He carried her out of the office, shielding her face against his chest so she wouldn't see the carnage in the hallway. "Don't look," he commanded gently. "Just listen to my heart. Don't look." He walked through the fire and the ruin he had created, carrying her toward the light. The safe house was a cabin deep in the mountains, miles away from the ocean villa. It was small, made of rough-hewn timber, and completely off the grid. No internet, no cell service, just the wind in the trees and the crackle of the wood stove. It had been 2 days since the kidnapping. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, wearing one of Dominic's oversized sweaters. Her arm was bandaged with professional precision. Dominic came in from the main room carrying a tray of food. He had barely slept. He spent his nights sitting in a chair by the door, a gun in his lap, watching the windows. He was in protector mode, hypervigilant, possessive, and incredibly gentle. He set the tray down and sat beside her. "You need to eat," he said softly. "I'm not hungry," Lena said. She looked at him. The dark circles under his eyes were like bruises. "You need to sleep. Dominic, Enzo is outside. The perimeter is secure. You said so yourself." "I can't sleep," he admitted. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. His fingers lingered near her temple, where the gun had been pressed. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you in that chair. I'm right here," she said, covering his hand with hers. "I'm safe. For now," he muttered darkly. He slid off the bed and went to one knee. It wasn't a theatrical gesture. He just seemed to need to be lower than her, to ground himself. He rested his forehead against her knees. "I never wanted this for you," he said. "I wanted to give you the world, not a war zone. I chose this," Lena reminded him gently. "You didn't choose to be used as bait," he countered. He looked up at her. His eyes were clear, burning with a fierce resolve. "I am going to fix this. I am going to end it. But before I do..." He reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a ring box. He pulled out a simple silver band. It looked old, worn. "This was my mother's," he said. "She was the only woman my father never raised his voice to. It survived the fire that took them. It's the only clean thing I own." He took her left hand. "I'm not asking you to be my queen," Dominic said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm asking you to be my life, because without you, I am just a ghost haunting a graveyard. Say yes, Lena. Say yes, and I swear to you, I will build a life where you never cry again. I will build a fortress so high that fear will never find you." Lena looked at the ring. It was heavy with history. She looked at Dominic, this dangerous, broken, beautiful man who loved her with a terrifying intensity. She hesitated. The fear was there, cold and rational. "I'm not afraid of you, Dominic," she whispered, repeating the words she had said weeks ago. "I'm afraid of what I might become beside you. I'm afraid that to survive in your world, I have to lose the parts of myself that you love." "You won't," he vowed. "I will carry the darkness. You just carry the light. That is the deal." "We'll figure it out," she whispered, tears spilling over. "Together." She nodded. Dominic slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He let out a breath that sounded like a sob, And then he buried his face in her lap, wrapping his arms around her waist. That night, the air in the cabin shifted. The trauma of the warehouse began to fade, replaced by a desperate need to affirm that they were alive. They fell into bed together as the fire burned low. It was slow, reverent. There was no rush, no aggression. Dominic undressed her with shaking hands, kissing every inch of skin he revealed, pausing over the bandage on her arm to press his lips to the white gauze as if he could heal the wound with his breath alone. "You are mine," he whispered against her mouth, "and I am yours." When he entered her, Lena gasped, arching to meet him. It was a reclaiming. He was washing away the memory of the cold warehouse, the fear, the violence. He was replacing it with heat and love and a profound, anchoring weight. He moved with restraint, holding himself back, ensuring she was with him every second. He watched her face, his eyes tracing her features as if memorizing her for a lifetime. When they finally found their release, clinging to each other in the dark, it felt less like pleasure and more like salvation. Later, in the deep hours of the night, Lena woke up. The space beside her was empty. She sat up. Dominic was standing by the window, looking out into the black forest. He was fully dressed in black. He was checking his weapon again. The softness of the bedroom was gone. The predator was back. "Dominic?" she called out softly. He didn't turn. "Go back to sleep. Lena? What are you doing?" "Thinking," he said. "Planning." Lena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty cabin. "Planning what?" Dominic turned his head. His profile was sharp, etched in stone. "Marcello is still alive. He thinks he can take you and live. He thinks he can threaten my family and wake up the next morning." "Dominic," Lena pleaded, getting out of bed and walking to him. She placed a hand on his rigid back. "We're safe here. You said we could leave. You said we could go away." "We can," Dominic said, "but not while he breathes. As long as Leon Marcello is alive, you will never be safe. He will hunt us. He will find us." He turned to face her. His eyes were dry and hard. "I promised you a life where you never cry again," he said. "To build that life, I have to clear the ground. I have to remove the weeds." "Don't lose yourself," Lena begged, clutching his shirt. "Please, don't let revenge consume you. If you go back there, if you do this, will the man I love come back, or will only the monster return?" Dominic looked at her. He raised a hand and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing over her lips. He didn't answer her question. He couldn't. He simply kissed her forehead, turned back to the window, and stared into the dark, waiting for the dawn to bring the war. The meeting point was an abandoned textile factory on the fringes of the industrial district, a cathedral of rust and broken glass where the moonlight filtered through the shattered roof in jagged beams. It was neutral ground, or as neutral as anything could be in a city carved up by wolves. Dominic Viero stood in the center of the vast, empty floor. He was alone. He had left his men outside, a perimeter of steel and silence. He wore a black coat, the collar turned up against the drafting wind. His hands were empty, held away from his sides to show he wasn't reaching for a weapon. At the far end of the hall, shadows detached themselves from the darkness. Leon Marcello stepped into the light, flanked by 4 armed guards. The rival Don looked haggard. The war Dominic had waged over the last 48 hours had been surgical and devastating. Marcello's supply lines were cut. His warehouses were ash, and his reputation was bleeding out on the streets. "You came alone," Marcello called out, his voice echoing off the metal girders. "Arrogant to the end. Viero." "I came to offer you a way out, Leon," Dominic said. His voice was calm, lacking the jagged edge of rage that had consumed him at the shipyard. This was business. This was the final transaction. Marcello laughed, a dry, nervous sound. "A way out? You think you can buy me off? After you slaughtered my crew?" "I think the police are closing in," Dominic replied. "The sirens are getting louder. Leon, the district attorney, has a file on his desk that's 3 inches thick. The city is too hot for both of us. One of us has to go." Dominic took a step forward. The guards raised their weapons. Dominic didn't flinch. Leave Northport, Dominic said. Take your money, take your remaining men and go south. Leave the territory to my organization. If you do that, you walk out of here alive. That is the offer. Marcello sneered, his face twisting with pride and hatred. "Ooh, you think I'm gonna run? From you? I built this city just as much as your father did. I'm not going anywhere, Dominic. But you're going in the ground." Marcello raised his hand, signaling his men to fire. Dominic didn't move. He didn't reach for a gun. He simply looked at Marcello with a profound, weary pity. "I was afraid you would say that." Before Marcello's hand could drop, a series of sharp, suppressed cracks echoed from the catwalks high above. Marcello's guards crumpled simultaneously, dropping like puppets with their strings cut. Dominic's snipers, hidden in the rafters for hours, I had not missed. Marcello stood alone, his eyes wide with shock. He fumbled for the pistol at his waist, his movements frantic and clumsy. Dominic walked toward him. He moved with a steady, inevitable pace. He drew his own weapon, a single smooth motion. "It didn't have to be this way," Dominic said. "Go to hell!" Marcello screamed, raising his gun. Dominic fired once. The shot was clean, center mass. Marcello fell back, hitting the concrete with a heavy thud. The silence that followed was absolute. Dominic stood over the man who had threatened to destroy everything he loved. He felt no triumph. He felt no rush of adrenaline. He only felt the weight of the gun in his hand, heavy and cold. It was over. The threat was gone. But the stain of it, the violence, the blood, felt permanent. He holstered the weapon and turned away, walking out of the factory into the night air. He didn't look back. The fallout was immediate. The death of a crime boss like Marcello did not go unnoticed. The police investigation, which had been simmering for months, boiled over. Raids were launched. Subpoenas were issued. The empire Dominic had spent 10 years building was shaking on its foundations. 3 days later, Dominic convened a meeting in the basement of the Onyx Lounge. The room was packed with his capos, his lieutenants, and the men who ran the streets for him. They looked nervous. They smelled blood in the water, and they were waiting for directions. Dominic stood at the head of the table. He looked at Silas, his father's old consigliere, and then at Marco, his head of security. "The heat is on," Dominic said, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "The police are looking for a head to put on a pike. If we stay the course, we all go down." "We can fight them, boss," Marco said, though he didn't sound convinced. "We can go to the mattresses. Wait it out." "No," Dominic said firmly. "War is bad for business, and I am done with war." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a set of keys. The keys to the club, the safe house, the vault. He placed them on the polished wood of the table. "I'm stepping down," Dominic announced. A gasp went around the room. Men looked at each other in disbelief. No one retired from life. You left in a coffin or handcuffs. "Silas knows the accounts," Dominic continued, ignoring the shock. "Marco holds the streets. You will divide the operations. You will go underground. Quiet down. Let the police chase ghosts. The Viero name dies today. It has become a myth." "Dominic," Silas said, his voice trembling slightly. "You can't just walk away. They won't let you." "They won't find me," Dominic said. He looked at the men he had led. "You have been loyal. I have made you rich. Now, I am giving you the chance to survive. Do not waste it." He turned and walked toward the door. "Boss," one of the younger soldiers called out. Dominic paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Don't call me that," he said softly. "Not anymore." He walked out, leaving the smoke-filled room and the crown of the underworld behind him. The next afternoon, Lena went to the rehabilitation center. The facility was bright and airy, smelling of eucalyptus rather than antiseptic. She found Jake in the common room, reading a graphic novel. He looked different. The color had returned to his cheeks. He wasn't wheezing. He looked like a normal 18-year-old boy, not a patient. "Hey," Lena said, sitting beside him. Jake looked up, a smile breaking across his face. "Lena, look. I walked a mile on the treadmill today. No inhaler." "That's amazing, Jake," she said, squeezing his hand. Her heart ached with relief. "I'm so proud of you." She hesitated, twisting the strap of her purse. Jake watched her, his smile fading into a look of perceptive concern. He had always been able to read her better than anyone. "What is it?" he asked. "You have your 'I have bad news' face on." "Not bad news," Lena said quickly. "Just big news. We might be leaving Northport soon. Jake. For good." Jake lowered the book. "Leaving. Why? Is it because of him? The guy who paid for all this?" Lena hadn't told Jake everything. She had told him she had a wealthy benefactor, a boyfriend who wanted to help. She hadn't told him about the guns, the warehouse, or the name Viero. "It's complicated," Lena said, "but it's time for a fresh start, somewhere warmer, somewhere safe." Jake looked at her for a long moment. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted to the door. He was young, but he had grown up in the city. He knew what fear looked like. "Okay," Jake said simply. "Okay. If you say we need to go, we go," Jake said. "You've never steered us wrong. Lena, if he makes you happy, and if he's the reason I can breathe, then I'm in." Lena hugged him, burying her face in his shoulder to hide her tears. "He does make me happy. Jake, he really does." That night, the Onyx Lounge was closed. The neon sign out front was dark. The doors were locked. Dominic unlocked the service entrance and held the door open for Lena. They walked into the main room. It was eerie without the music and the crowd. The crystal chandeliers were dim, casting long shadows over the velvet booths and the empty stage. Their footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor. Dominic walked slowly, his hand in hers. He was saying goodbye to the only home he had known for the last decade. They stopped at the bar where he had first watched her work. Dominic leaned against the polished mahogany, looking at her. "This is where you tried to hide from me," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You wore that terrible uniform and tried to blend into the wallpaper. I was terrified of you," Lena admitted, leaning into him. "Everyone said you were a monster." "I was," Dominic said quietly, "until you." He lifted her hand, bringing it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, then turned her hand over to kiss her palm. "You scratched my car," he whispered against her skin, his eyes locking onto hers. "You took a piece of metal and ruined a $10,000 paint job, and in doing so, you rewrote my fate." "I still can't believe you kept the note," Lena said softly. "I framed it," Dominic teased gently. "It's coming with us." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her waist. The club was silent around them, a tomb for a life that was ending. "Are you sure?" Lena asked, searching his face. "You're leaving a kingdom. Dominic, you're leaving power. Can you really be happy just being normal?" Dominic looked around the empty room. He looked at the shadows where he had beaten men, the corners where deals were made in blood. Then he looked at Lena. "This isn't power," he said. "This is a cage. Power is choosing your own life. Power is waking up next to you and knowing that no one is coming to take it away." He kissed her then. It was a kiss of finality and beginning. It tasted of hope. They left the club through the back door, leaving the keys on the bar for Silas to find in the morning. They spent their last night in the city at the penthouse apartment. It was a night of quiet intimacy. There was no frantic desperation, no fear of the morning. They made love with the windows open, letting the sounds of the city drift in one last time. Dominic was different. The tension that usually held his body rigid was gone. He laughed, a genuine, deep sound, when Lena tickled his side. He held her with a looseness that spoke of peace as he slept. His arm thrown carelessly over his eyes, Lena watched him. She traced the scar on his shoulder, the line of his jaw. She realized then that she wasn't a victim of circumstance. She wasn't the poor waitress trapped by a mafia don. She had walked into the alley. She had stayed. She had bandaged his hand. She had chosen him just as he had chosen her. She was no longer powerless. She was the woman who had tamed the wolf. And tomorrow, they will walk out of the forest together. 6 months later. The sun was bright and relentless, baking the cobblestone streets of a coastal town halfway across the country. The air smelled of salt and roasting coffee beans. On the corner of the main square, a small cafe bustles with activity. The sign above the door read, "The Heart Soul," painted in elegant gold script. Inside, the espresso machine hissed and steamed. Lena moved behind the counter with practiced efficiency, steaming milk and pouring it into ceramic cups. She wore a light sundress, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She looked healthier, happier. The shadows under her eyes were gone. "Order up for table 4, Jake called out from the kitchen window. He was wearing a chef's coat, laughing as he played a croissant. He looked vibrant, full of life. The bell above the door chimed. Dominic walked in. He didn't look like Dominic Viero anymore. The tailored black suits were gone, replaced by dark jeans and a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His hair was slightly longer, softer, but the way he walked, with that undeniable, prowling grace, was still there. He was carrying a crate of fresh oranges from the market. He set them down on the counter and wiped his brow. "Delivery," he said, grinning at Lena. "You're late," she teased, sliding a cup of black coffee toward him. "I got held up," Dominic said, taking a sip. "Traffic is brutal. There are 3 cars in this entire town. Dominic—" Lena laughed. "Exactly. It was a gridlock." He leaned over the counter to kiss her, ignoring the whistle from a regular customer in the corner. "Hey, boss," Jake called out. "Someone parked a delivery truck out front. I think they clipped your bumper." Dominic froze. Lena froze. They looked at each other. Dominic walked to the window. Outside, parked in front of the cafe, was their car, a sensible, mid-range sedan. A delivery driver was backing his truck up, and indeed, the metal bumper was scraping agonizingly against the side of their car. The driver jumped out, looking panicked. He saw Dominic, a large, imposing man, watching through the window. The driver looked ready to faint. Lena held her breath. She waited for the flash of anger. She waited for the Viero to surface. Dominic watched the driver apologize frantically to the air. He looked at the scratch, a long, jagged white line on the blue paint. And then Dominic threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, joyous sound that filled the cafe. He turned back to the counter, shaking his head, tears of mirth in his eyes. "Unbelievable," he chuckled. "The universe has a sense of humor." Lena rolled her eyes. Though she was smiling so hard her face hurt. "You're still dramatic," she said, wiping the counter. "It's just a scratch. It'll buff out." Dominic walked back to her. He circled the counter and pulled her into his arms, pressing her back against the espresso machine, trapping her just as he had that first night in the alley. But this time, there was no fear. There was only warmth and the smell of oranges and coffee. "I don't care about the car," he murmured, nuzzling her neck. "Let it rust. Let it fall apart." "You say that now," Lena whispered, running her hands through his hair. "Wait until you see the repair bill." Dominic pulled back to look at her. His eyes were soft, brown in the sunlight, free of the darkness that had once consumed them. "I'd pay it 1,000 times over," he said, his voice dropping to that rough, intimate register that still made her shiver. "Only for the girl who made me human again." He kissed her, deep and slow, right there in the middle of the cafe, while the coffee machine hissed and the ocean breeze drifted through the open door, carrying the promise of 1,000 ordinary tomorrows. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Lena and Dominic from the dark alleys of Northport to their happy ending in the sun. It has been a pleasure bringing this emotional roller coaster to life for you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below telling me where you are listening from in the world. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Mafia Romance Stories channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts on the ending in the comments section. Did Dominic make the right choice? Let me know. Until next time, keep reading and keep dreaming.